Peter, first of all, can't thank you enough for taking some
My
time.
pleasure, Seth. You've produced some great content and got a lot of respect for your talents. So pleasure
Thank,
to be here.
thank you, thank you. It is truly an honor to sit with you because I think I started following you back in 2011 or 2012 when you were doing the flying lap,
Hmm.
and just loved your content then, and I take in all the stuff you put out now with your live streams and everything. You just do you do fantastic work. Not only, as I was saying before, not only do I love, just appreciate your knowledge for this sport that I've grown to love with Formula One, but just you're a wonderful person, and I have great respect for you, and have just it's such an honor and privilege to get some time with you. So I look up to you a lot, Peter.
Okay, pleasure.
Yeah, it
Thank you very much.
means a lot that you take some time out of your day.
Yeah,
So
no
thank you.
worries. No worries.
Yeah, so I know that you have made the jump from London to Spain.
Yeah.
Before I chat F1, I'm a coffee fan. If I was in Spain, where am I finding the best cup of coffee right now?
You'd be in trouble actually. It's the one. If I say I tick most of the boxes here in Spain, but the coffee thing situation is not good.
Okay.
Luckily, I've got some very good friends that send me some great coffee from Colombia. So I get the beans and we make the coffee here at home. It was a good excuse to buy one of those, mega coffee making machines, which we've got.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't. I mean, even Starbucks tastes kind of weird in Spain. I don't know what it is. I think it's the milk probably because there don't
Okay.
seem to be a lot of cows here for obvious reasons. It's pretty hot, and so it's all sort of processed milk. And I don't know. The coffee now, even if you ask for a latte or a cappuccino, it comes in a tiny, tiny cup. Nothing wrong
Really?
with small servings, but that means it's basically 90% strong black acidic coffee and
Sure.
1% or 10% milk. It's just not the same. It's the one thing I miss actually, are the sort of coffee shops, and that whole coffee shop thing just doesn't exist in Spain, and they don't seem to do it. It's not their morning. So yeah,
Okay.
but that's great because they've got a great climate. There's a million other things you can be out there doing, and so it encourages you to go and do those instead.
That's right. That's right. I know you're a big golf fan. Are you getting to play much golf?
Yeah, we're playing a lot. We live on a golf resort,
Oh,
and
nice.
it's a beautiful course, Jack Nicklaus design course, and it's amazingly from about 4 o'clock, it's empty every day. The
Wow.
driving range is grass rather than mats, and it's usually empty apart from one or two others. And it's just a joy. You don't have to queue. It's easy to get on the course whenever you want, and it's everything. Actually, I thought golf is big in Spain. I thought it would be a bit like the United States, absolutely packed on a good day. But here it's just so laid back and relaxed. It's brilliant. And my son Jack is pretty good now, and he from school. I pick him up at 4:30, and we're usually on the driving range by 5 till about 6:30 every day. There aren't not that many kids in the world are that lucky, I think, and that's purely because there's just so many courses, so many driving ranges. The weather's so good, and I just keep the golf clubs in the car all the time.
That's fantastic. I love that you get to share that with your son. Our two sons just took their first golf lessons, so they're getting the itch to play more, and
Yeah,
so that's a beautiful thing to be able to share that with your son. I love that. Uh,
yeah,
yeah. So jumping over to the world of Formula One,
yeah.
you have a wonderful background in this sport, and one of my favorite things about your live streams is obviously you have incredible knowledge of this sport for your years in it. But I love the stories that you have. You've rubbed shoulders with some of the greats. It's amazing. You've worked with some exceptional teams, one being Williams, which is my favorite. And so I'd love to know, how did F1 first catch your attention years ago? What was it that pulled you into the sport?
It was the Scale Extric logo on a box of Scale Extric model raceway, and the feel of the box, opening the magazines that were out at the time, all telling us about how great Scale Extric was, and then looking at the little figures that were there, the white fence they had, the pits, the cars, the track, and from that something was lit inside me, and I just wanted to see the real thing. And I was not disappointed, because the real thing was just the same. It was a beautiful pit lane, flags flying, and the drivers and the cars, and it was everything that Scalextric had introduced me to was there in front of me. And the question then was what to do about that, because my mum was cracking the whip, and you know, I had to be at school every day and had to do sport every day. I was reasonably good at cricket, reasonably good at football, and rugby football, that is. And so, you know, and often I was playing weekends sport for the school, and it was difficult to know how to progress in motor racing. So I started off as a flag marshal quite young, and then I started going to the local motor racing club where I lived in Sydney, which organized the race meetings at Warwick Farm, the big racetrack there, beautiful racetrack. It had an international race every year for all the Formula One drivers. And I just loved being in that club room. It was just it was a converted bank on a corner of a street in Sydney, downtown Sydney. And there was a counter, which was obviously the counter of the bank. And then there was a back office where the head guy, Jeff Sykes, was. And then there was Mary, who was one of the two. And there was John Stranger, who was the accountant. And then there was me in my school holidays, just dealing with people that were becoming in club members, wanting to renew their membership or get their race cards signed from the previous race, whatever it was. And then at lunch, I'd go off and make the sandwiches and clean the cars for the club. And I just loved that feeling of being a part of the motor racing world. I had no idea where it was going to lead and what perhaps motor racing was really all about. I had no idea really, but I just loved to breathe that air. And every time I wrote the name of a driver on a piece of paper, on a card where his lap times are going to be, I got a very special thrill, regardless of who the driver was. He was a racing driver. And so, yeah, I just went from there. And Jeff Sykes encouraged me to write, because I was reasonably good at English as a subject in school, and started writing for local magazines and newspapers. And it kind of went from there, really. But I was very lucky to meet Formula One drivers at a young age when they came over to Australia. I guess they were quite relaxed, and actually to take pictures of them and shake their hands and kind of get to know them. And in the case of Jim Clark, actually to talk to him for quite a long time, one-on-one. So though I don't think I would have had that opportunity had I been living in the UK or perhaps even in America. But in Australia, it was a tiny world, and these big stars were arriving, and I was able to get up pretty close and personal with them, which was brilliant.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. I know that you know, from listening to your content, I know that you have a great appreciation for Jim Clark, and he is, you know, he's one that I never had the privilege of seeing race, but I love your stories about him. And I've heard you tell the one about, you know, when you got to meet him early on. Can you share again, you know, that about what was it like that first time you got to, you know, you get to stand in front of this man, this driver that you look up to so much?
Yeah.
What was an interaction like?
Well, if I think about it now, it's one of the reasons I'm in Spain. I think about Australia in February, which was hot. It was the middle of the long, hot summer, but it was a vibrant summer. And if you weren't having a barbecue on the beach, we were rushing down to the surf and surfing all day, and everything was blue and bright colored and incredibly vivacious. It was just, the world was full of life. And then on top of all that, there was this mysterious thing where suddenly the Formula One drivers would be racing in New Zealand, in the 4 races in New Zealand, and Pukekohe, Wigram, Levin, and Teretonga. And I didn't know much about it because it was not on television, but I would get the odd, in the middle of listening to the cricket on the ABC radio, I would suddenly say, now we go over to so-and-so who's at Teretonga for the 4th round of the Tasman series. And this crackly voice saying, today at Teretonga, Jim Clark won a closely fought battle with Bruce McLaren to win the Teretonga 100. I think, wow, that's happening in New Zealand. I can't believe it. And it dawned on me that maybe they'll be racing in Australia. And so I literally just picked up the phone. I dialed TAA, Trans-Australian Airlines, and ANZ ANA, the 2 national carriers, and said, and literally got a guy, a friendly guy or girl on the phone and said, look, I'm wondering if Mr. J. Clark or Mr. J. Stewart or on any flights coming from New Zealand to Sydney in the next 2 weeks. And instead of just putting the phone down, they'd say, oh, we'll go through the list now and have a look. And they were really helpful in the days when you could do that. And oh yeah, sure. There's Mr. J. Clark booked on Ansett at blah 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 236 out of Invercargill, arriving Sydney, blah 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 blah. And I'd get all these things. And so I would just, I would live in this world of I'm going to see Jim Clark arriving at the airport, and I'd get on a ferry, go across the harbour, and get a bus to Sydney Airport, and I'd wait there. I'd get there 3 hours early, as you can imagine. My mum would pack a lunch for me and so forth, and yeah, and I used to see them at the airport, arriving, getting off the flight. And usually they were very well dressed with, what we would call chinos today, but even more upmarket chinos and nice shoes and okay, open neck shirt because it was a Wednesday or whatever. But they were very well presentable, all carrying briefcases. And, I say they, Jackie Stewart, Jim Clark, Denny Holm, Graham Hill. But as for the first time I ever saw Jim Clark, that was in '65. Beginning of that brilliant year when he won the World Championship and the Indy 500 in the same year. And it was February '65. My dad worked at a company called Reckitt and Coleman. Reckitt is still a part of the name of the company today, but it's been taken over by another company. But he was the personnel director. So he was able to tell some guys what to do. And he knew that one of his guys was a flag marshal at Warwick Farm. And it was impossible to get in. This is before I started working at the club even, or going there. And it was impossible to get a pass. You just couldn't buy a pass. Only marshals and officials and competitors could get in the paddock area. And so my dad did a deal with this guy to pick me up at an appointed time, halfway around the track, very early in the morning, while he was driving round to the paddock area in his old Peugeot. And yeah, I got there for 7 a.m., whatever it was, and jumped over the fence, and he hooked up the boot, popped the boot of his Peugeot. I jumped in the boot. He closed the boot, drove around the track. And the next thing, he popped open the boot, and I was in the paddock area for the International 100 at Warwick Farm. Wow. On February 1965. And I opened it up, and you can imagine I was in darkness, and there was just blue sky, green grass, flags flying, and racing cars everywhere. And it was still very early. And I opened, came out, and there was Jim Clark standing literally 20 feet away, wearing beige chinos, no shirt. It was very hot already, talking to Ray Parsons, his mechanic, very near his car, green and yellow, chrome glistening off the morning sun. And did that leave an impression on me? And I didn't say much then. I had a copy of Jim Clark at the Wheel, his book, with me. And I just walked straight up to him and said, "Oh, hello, Mr. Clark. Could I please ask you to sign this?" And he took my red biro and signed it. In fact, I've got it here, I think. Let me have a look.
Amazing.
Yeah, and so
you still have the actual book.
Oh yeah, of course.
That is incredible.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's the and he just signed it, Jim Clark.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So and I was already a Clark fan because I'd read that book. And I tell you what, there was the number 10 edition of Automobile Year, which was the big glossy annual that came out every year. I didn't know it existed, but for my I guess it must have been my 11th birthday, my mum and dad gave me that book, and it was for the 62 season, so it was a year out of date when they gave it to me, but that didn't matter. I didn't know. And it was just the first time I'd ever really opened a book about motor racing and looked at the pages and read all the text. And in those days, Automobile Year was very shiny, lovely paper, an incredible smell. I can smell the print even now as I'm talking to you. And there were some pictures there of Jimmy sitting in the Lotus 25 at the Belgian and Dutch Grand Prix when it really first appeared. And I remember just looking at those pictures of Clark in the 25, and he's wearing this pullover over his overalls, just thinking, wow, that is my world. That is Formula One. That is Jim Clark. And from that moment, it was that photograph, I think, more than any other, that I was just completely on the path of trying to follow everything he did, which was not easy in Australia at that time because we had, as I say, no TV coverage, no internet, nothing. So you'd be dependent on the local newspapers for race results during the year. And if an Australian, i.e. Jack Brabham, wasn't doing well, or Frank Gardner, chances were there'd be nothing about that race whatsoever. It wouldn't even be in the results. So I'd have no idea what was going on at all, unless an Australian did something, or sadly, unless a driver was killed. Then it would always get news. So it just grew from there, really. And then you can imagine for a kid who'd never seen action on television at all, never seen racing cars moving on television. I'd been to a couple of races by then, obviously, but you can imagine what it was like. And all I'd ever seen really was Clark in black and white photographs, admittedly beautiful photographs. Then suddenly seeing him in this Technicolor golden Saturday morning at Warwick Farm, standing by the Lotus 32B. You can imagine the impression it left on me. And I probably, the fire it lit was probably greater because of that. And had I been more exposed at a young age, as you would be today, to the Netflix show, to watching Formula One live on TV every weekend, to all the other stuff that comes with it, it probably wouldn't have made such an impression on me. So in a way, I guess I was lucky to be in that era and to be in that time and to have those sparks that became ignited inside me and drove me at a very early age, really. I mean, I remember going to school, I don't know, I must have been about 14, 15, thinking, I never, ever want to feel bad on a Monday because I feel terrible now. I've just been at a race meeting at Warwick Farm. It was in the winter, I think, and I was flag marshalling. I felt so depressed having to go back to school on the Monday that I just vowed I would never want to feel that bad on a Monday. And I wanted to be in a job which always made me feel good on a Monday morning. And luckily, ever since I left school, basically I've been doing that, give or take a year or two. So, you know, that drove me to that. And I remember saying to Jim Clark, when I did eventually sit down with him for a long chat in '68, I really want to have a career in motorsport. I don't really know what I want to do, but I know that's what I want and what I can contribute some way. And I remember him looking him in the eye and saying, don't ever give up. You will succeed. Never, ever give up. And, you know, that's been my kind of mantra. And I see Clark as a bit of a mentor in that sense, because those words have never left my psyche over the years. Never.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, Peter. Well, I'm proud of you. You did it.
Well, I haven't done it, Seth. You know, all I'm doing is what I do, which is try to share my interest and enthusiasm for what is going on. And if something doesn't make sense to me, I question it. I try not to be too critical. I try to be positive, but at the same time, growing up as I did, obviously I have a standard that I kind of relate to, which is based on my eras and my age, and I can only relate to that standard. And sometimes if that standard is a bit lower than you would expect, then I kind of talk about it sometimes, maybe.
Well, I greatly appreciate it. I love this is one of the reasons I love to listen to you. And I tune into all your content is because obviously I love your passion for Formula One, but it's your attention to the details that a lot of other people gloss over, like how you're talking about seeing it in black and white and then seeing it in color for the first time, and just the sights and the smells, you have a level of appreciating this sport unlike many people, and I really respect that and love that about you. And
thanks, Seth. It's a funny thing, because I don't know if you find this or other viewers find this, but when you've had moments like that, usually in your childhood, but sometimes they can be in your adolescence, sometimes even in adulthood, these golden moments, these very special moments, and there's a whole lot of things that can trigger that memory. It can be smell, it can be light, it can be music, it can be sounds, it can be a number of things. But it's very, very difficult to recreate them. Even if you know what the composite elements are, it's difficult to recreate them. And if I think about that day with Jimmy in '65, and I can think about the grass, even though it was early morning, I can think of the smell of sort of barbecued bacon and eggs mixed with beer a little bit, and fuel and brake fluid, all that mixed together. It's difficult to recreate that. And and I find that even as time goes on, it's more and more difficult to recreate it. Although music is a very, very good trigger. When I first saw Jackie Stewart walking through the paddock at Warwick Farm, it was late in '66. It was after the practice session, and he's wearing his blue Dunlop overalls still. And I remember they were playing, I think I'm correct in saying it might have been '67, but they were playing The Long and Winding Road on the PA. And whenever I hear that, I think of Jackie, always. And whenever I think of All There Is Love, the other Beatles song, I always think of Dan Gurney winning the Belgian Grand Prix, because that happened to be playing when I first read that he'd won that race, a month later, obviously. And the day Jimmy died in 68, April the 7th, it was April the 8th in Sydney. It was already the Monday morning when I heard the news. They played, just after announcing that, right at the end of the news, they played the Peter Sarstedt song, Where Do You Go To My Lovely? And whenever I hear that, I always think of Jimmy, always. There's other songs too that trigger memories. So it's music and it's a lot of other things, but it's very difficult to recreate them. And throughout my motor racing career, and just taking a normal race meeting in Australia at a circuit called Catalina Park in the Blue Mountains, lovely little track. I went there for the first time, I don't know when it was, early 60s, 64 probably. And my dad, it was the winter, and my dad and I camped on the other side of the paddock area, just on the public enclosure area. And that, again, you had the breakfast smells, you had the noise of the cars revving up early in the morning. And then you had the flags and the grass and the picket fence and a little bit of the sort of Blue Mountains bark from the eucalyptus trees and all that. And I've never, ever managed to recreate that in my mind ever again. I've always tried to. I've gone to plenty of Goodwoods to try and expose myself to that thrill, and it's never, ever come back. And it's probably because I was very young at the time, I guess. But it just, but those moments live with you forever. And those moments are the ones that are very special to me.
I love that you've been able to hold on to those sights and smells and those memories. That's beautiful. I was able to attend my first race back in 2021 in Austin, and I'll never forget standing at the S's when I first saw an F1 car go around the track. And to this day, it literally took my breath away. I've never seen, I'd watched it for years on TV, but there's something unbelievable.
Yeah, and just blink and you missed it. But full marks to you for going to the S's, which is about the only really good section of road in Austin, in my view. It's a fabulous entry there.
Yes,
it's a good section of road, and it's great that, because most people will go to the boring places like the hairpin or maybe turn one or whatever. Not boring, but predictable. But the S's are really, really quick, and that's really good place to watch.
Yeah, it was incredible. It took my absolutely breathtaking. If you had if you had the chance to sit down with Jim Clark today and ask him one question, what do you think you'd ask him?
Well, I think it'd be Jim Clark asking me a million questions. What the hell is that? What is this? Why is he doing that? What's going on here? I think it would be so much fun. I often think about that. If you had to take Jim Clark, let's say he'd not been killed and he'd lived on a farm and completely as a hermit for the last, whatever it is, 50 years. And suddenly he reappeared and he said, I want to go to a Formula One race. I need someone to show me around, tell me what's going on. And magically I was given that job. I've often wondered, what that would be like and what questions he would ask and whether he would think, well, that's a bit stupid, or whether he would think, wow, it's a good question, isn't it? I don't know. I think Jim would say, he'd probably say, well, is Adrian Newey exclusive to Red Bull, or can I have him working on a car for me as well? That's probably what he'd get right down to it straight away, I imagine.
Yeah.
Pretty
That's
sharp.
Fantastic. That's great. That's great.
Or does Adrian Newey know Colin Chapman? Because Colin would probably like to meet him.
That's great. Another legend of the sport that you've rubbed shoulders with, that I was around for, but was never witnessed racing because I had not caught the bug for F1 yet, is Ayrton Senna. Can you share can you share a special memory that you had with him? I've heard you share some in your live streams, and I just think it's, yeah, they're always beautiful. Is there
Um,
one that stands out to you?
well, yeah, I mean, Ayrton was. I've often say when a very very special driver comes along, I often think in my mind, is he going to replace Jim Clark in my mind? And yeah, Ayrton was pretty near to that, but he had the wherewithal to know that he was Ayrton Senna and he was not Jim Clark, and actually to be very respectful about Jim. And I don't know, because he was a very nice guy, Ayrton. That was, I mean, he was pretty ruthless on the track, very ruthless,
Mhm.
very ruthless. Martin Brundle, Nigel Mansell would know that, do know that. And he did some pretty, horrid things. But he also was a very good person, I thought. And certainly, I remember, I mean, I was doing a race at Macau one year, and it was, I wanted to do well. It was a touring car race, and it was in '84. I think it was Hungary, and I said, well, yeah, it was about then. It was not Hungary, somewhere else. Maybe in Portugal actually. And I sat down with him and said, "Can you just talk me through a lap of Macau, Ayrton?" And he said, "Yeah, yeah, sure." And it literally 20 minutes he took to just talk through a lap of Macau, and every detail. If there's a manhole cover here and guardrail there, he talked about the distance between the edge of the manhole cover and the beginning of the guardrail, and how much room there was, and what spot on the road you had to hit. It was unbelievably precise. And everything he said, I mean, it was before the days of simulators, but when I drove out and did my first couple of laps, everything was exactly as Ayrton had said it.
Hmm.
That was one thing. And the other was at the end of his Ford 2000, end of his Formula 3 career, when, no, it was in the Ford 2000 career. And I knew him pretty well by then. I'd watched him quite a lot in Formula Ford and Ford 2000. And we were at Thruxton, and he just said, "Well, you ain't going to see me again. I'm back to Brazil. I'm retiring." Well, I said, "Wow, what's going on?" And he said, "Oh, well, I've done enough. And if I can't get the backing to do Formula 3 the way I want it, I'm not going to do it." And I remember thinking, well, at the time, I just thought he is going to retire and we're not going to see him again. I remember thinking, what a waste. But he was absolutely, totally prepared to do that. Just as Alan Prost was prepared to do that at the end of his first McLaren season. If he couldn't get released to go to Renault, he was just going to stop racing.
Hmm.
And Ayrton did the same thing. And he was quite emotional about it, to the point of genuinely feeling that he just had his last race in Europe. And that, I guess, looking back now, just shows his incredible self-belief and self-confidence. Not that he was going to get the money he needed to do Formula 3, but it was, I'm good enough not to have to beg, and I'm not going to beg. I'm just going to wait and go back to Brazil, and the moment I'm not preparing to come back to Europe. And that left a big impression on me. I mean, many times you'd stroll down the pit lane, find out and chat to him, whether it was Formula 3, Formula Ford, Ford 2000, and you just chat about corners and what revs he was doing on the straight, and if he'd had a moment, what caused that moment. So yeah, I mean, one thing, after he passed away, I was writing an article for the Sunday Times about the accident and doing as much research as I could. And Crichton Brown, who's a very good friend of mine, one of the original founders of McLaren MP41, with close to Ron, very good driver in his own right, was at McLaren at that time. And he was very, very close to Ayrton, because Crichton's wife was Brazilian, and Crichton owned property in Brazil as well. So there was an automatic friendship there. And Crichton told me, when I was doing research for this article, that he said, "Peter, I don't know if this is relevant or not, but I can tell you that Ayrton once said to me that when he's about to begin a pole lap, a qualifying lap to try to get the pole, he holds his breath for as long as he can possibly hold it throughout the lap. Now, I'm sure most of the physios today would not recommend that to anyone, but that shows what Ayrton, the detail that Ayrton would go to try and find any slight advantage, just to increase, I guess, the blood flow to the head, whatever it was, and just the sensitivity that he was feeling. And yeah, that, you know, that to me was eye-opening, really, about Ayrton.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's for not getting to be able to experience him. It's beautiful to get to hear those close
Yeah, I mean,
insights
he
from
had
you.
this weird throttle thing that he used to do all the time, mid-corner, just waiting for the moment when he could get on the power. And I asked, and he did that in Formula 3 a lot. And I asked, after he won Macau, I asked him why he did that. It was the first time I'd really asked him. And he just said, "Oh, I can't not do it. It's the way I drive. I've always driven that way. I guess I shouldn't be doing it, but I can't help myself. It's the only way I know how to drive." Which was interesting, because, you know, if you want to put him alongside the very pure great drivers, you'd have to say that was potentially a shortcoming. It kind of fell into sync when he was in a turbo car with throttle lag, but then most of the quick drivers of that era were always capable of finding the moment with throttle anyway, with turbo lag. So I don't think it was I think that's been blown way out of proportion, but it was an idiosyncrasy of Ayrton that he had that was just kind of strange. I don't think his corners were particularly short either. I think he was absolutely on the edge of perfection, of classic perfection. And most drivers who drive on that edge make quite a lot of mistakes. Ayrton made very few mistakes. That was the difference. But if he was in any way compromised, it would end up in a massive shunt, as we saw in Formula 3 a couple of times. So, you know, it was a style of driving that had no margin for error. Well, let me put, it had a very small sweet spot, his style of driving. And so he was quite capable of finding it virtually every time. It's like, in the golf equivalent would be that he could hit a 1-iron perfectly 9 times out of 10, but there was always the 1 time out of 10 when the tiny sweet spot would catch him out.
Sure. So yeah, so with all these, you know, your years in Formula One and the incredible stories you have and memories you have, what do you think for you is, you know, I like to I think of like the magic of Formula One. What is it for you that keeps you coming back year after year?
Well, it's been different things. I think I'm lucky that I can say it's been different things over the years. I've never really done the same thing more than 1 year in a row, really. It's my life's constantly changed within the Formula One thing. So even today, I'm doing different things. I'm starting to do more live streams. We're looking at the next phase of the Formula One Global Exhibition. I've got other projects going on. I'm trying to help a couple of drivers, which is different from last year. So, which was different from the previous year. And obviously things change according to technology as well and where I'm working. So nothing has ever changed. And because I've always sort of been able to press that refresh button, I've never really got bored with any of it. And you know, there are certain aspects of life and of motor racing that we all probably think are a bit boring, but generally I always love the concept of a racing car being driven very, very well by very skillful people around a closed road course. And it doesn't really, and that is the main thing. It's not about the excitement or the overtaking or crashes or whatever, or indeed gossip. It's about that art of driving a racing car very well. I find the art of driving a lot more interesting than the intricacies of the technology, to be honest. But that's just me. I accept that the technology of the cars is critical and we have to have a broad brush understanding of it, but I bow to the technical experts, obviously, when it comes to aerodynamics and dynamics, vehicle dynamics. But in terms of the driving, that is what I really find interesting and really enjoy watching, to be honest.
That's great. I always appreciate as well when listening to you, hearing you talk about the way that you appreciate drivers' styles, and it's helped me to take in F1 when I'm watching a race or a practice session in a different way, because I love how you appreciate that. Is there, shifting to the F1 of today, is there a particular driver that really intrigues you with their driving style?
Well, not intrigues. I think is the wrong word. I think I'm fascinated to. No, I enjoy, I guess is the right word. I enjoy watching anybody who, in my opinion, is pretty near perfection. I don't believe the perfect lap has ever been driven or ever will be driven, but
Mhm.
the drivers that are somewhere near that level of perfection, I always love watching. And to my mind, that's Max, Lewis, and Charles at the moment, with some potential young pretenders coming along. But watching those three, and actually not enjoying it, but looking at the mistakes they make within their world of perfection is actually the most interesting part of it. I think watching humans, how they recover from mistakes and how they work around them and how they minimize the downsides is the real skill. And certainly Max is doing that beautifully this year. Lewis very well too. Charles, his mistakes are a little bit more obvious and a bit raw at the moment. So that's going to be fascinating to watch how he recovers from that, which I'm sure he will.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I've got a couple questions that kind of follow that up. Um, First of all, if and I think I've asked you this before, and I would love to ask you again, if you were starting a team today in Formula One, and you were looking long term to build your team around two drivers of the current drivers on the grid, not named Max Verstappen, who are you taking for your two drivers?
Well, I'm probably going to give a different answer now because I've seen Oscar Piastri and I think he's really good. Um, I'd love to keep Lando, but I'm not sure long term that he's going to be better than Piastri.
Hmm.
It's an interesting battle. Of the drivers not named Verstappen, and on the basis that I don't think Lewis is going to race for more than a year or two, I think I would probably go for Charles because I like the fact that he's still a rough diamond and there's still a lot of growth there for him,
Sure.
potential growth. And I'd like to think that I could probably get the best from him. So I'd have Charles in one car, and yeah, I'd possibly go for Piastri or Lando in the other, one of the two McLaren drivers. Maybe Lando because he's such a cool guy and he's a good golfer. I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe it's going to swing it. But you got Charles and Lando, both good golfers, so that would make racing a lot of fun.
That's great. That's great. And then also, if you were to, it's obviously hard to picture this anyone else winning a title right now with Max on the grid. He's just so dominant with the Red Bull. But who do you think is the next uh, world champion besides Max Verstappen? And we've got a handful of just incredibly talented drivers. But if you were to look into the future, who do you think has the greatest chance of obviously there are millions of factors, but
Mm. Well, again, if you exclude Lewis, I would say George
mhm.
is the most likely of the next generation to be world champion. I would say. I'd like to say Charles as well. I mean, you can't separate them from the team in the car.
Mhm.
So Charles in a Ferrari to win the championship, very difficult. Charles in a Mercedes or certainly a Red Bull, a much easier task. So it depends if he stays where he is or not. And I'd like to think Ferrari will be a lot more competitive over the next few years. Maybe they will be. But Charles obviously has the talent to win a world championship, no doubt about that at all. But George, right now, you'd have to say be slightly better placed if you exclude Lewis and Max
Mhm.
from that. if you don't exclude Lewis, then I'd have to say Lewis. He's still driving beautifully and
Sure.
absolutely as good as he's ever been. So no reason not to have Lewis in that as another potential champion. But he's already got 7, So
That's right.
I think what you mean is a driver who hasn't yet won a championship. And if that's the case, I would say George or Charles. I don't think I'm being that imaginative when I say that. Most people would probably agree with me. I think George has definitely got the drive to do that.
Yeah, I like both those drivers a lot. I've grown to have a lot of respect for George. So, you raise a good point here too, and I'd love to hear your take on this. A lot of people, I don't have a whole lot of friends who are super into F1, but when I do chat with someone, they, a lot of times they'll say, well, how much of it is actually the driver? How much of it is actually the machine that they're driving? What would you say to that breakdown? Since you've been close to.
Oh, I think when a car crosses the line, like Max winning this year, I'd say it's 60% car, 40% driver. But there's a big but. There's a big proviso. I think the driver can play a large role in creating that correct ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And if, for example, Max suddenly drove for AlphaTauri rather than Red Bull, I think he would make the AlphaTauri a better car over a period of about 3 to 4 races. And then you'd find, right at that moment, the car would be dominating. Maybe when he first went to AlphaTauri, it'd be like 70-30, but I think he could take it back to the 60-40, and I think he could make it quite a quick car, purely not because he's got great inputs, oral inputs or audio inputs. It's all because he's driving the car as a racing car should be driven perfectly, and the engineers then have got a very clear picture of where they're going with the development of the car. And Max can say also what he wants from the car in order to be quicker, and knowing in the back of his mind what he can make up for if it's not quite right, but this is the priority he needs from the engineers. And a lot of other drivers aren't able to do that. All they're able to say is understeer, oversteer, don't have enough grip, cars wind sensitive, whatever it is, curb sensitive. But Max, like all the great drivers, won't even talk about things that are number 4 on the list of things the engineers need to deal with. He just wants them to focus on the one thing he knows, that if he has that, he can then do a bit of a compromise lap with his own driving and get the time out of it. And that's what you don't get from the average Grand Prix driver. That's what a Max would bring to you. So he would try to make it 60-40, because that's how the job is easiest done, to let the car do the work for you.
For sure. Yeah, I would love to see Max get into a Williams for one race and just see what would happen. Williams or an AlphaTauri, and just see what, because he's special, and I love to see what he would do with a car like that.
Well, he'd probably say, put a bit more wing on the car, please. Why is it so ridiculously quick in a straight line?
Yeah.
I haven't mentioned Fernando in any of this either. I think I would probably find Fernando quite difficult to work with, because I think he's quite political. A, and B, I don't think he has the same envelope of performance on the individual lap that a Charles or a Max or a Lewis has. But in terms of a race driver, as we all know, it's a cliche now, a race driver on race day, he's pretty good at bringing a car home and getting into a rhythm and looking after it and driving around issues. Very, very good at that.
Yeah. It was a pretty fun podium in Montreal, seeing those, Lewis and Fernando and Max, those, greats all up there together. Shifting to my last name is Williams. I grew up, my dad and his brothers, I grew up in a home where I saw Williams merch all over the place, so what do you think it's going to take to get a team like Williams back in the fight?
Well, I think they're already starting to make great progress. James Bowles looks like a racer that understands the decisions that need to be taken. I was very impressed with his decision to put Albon on slicks in Q2 in Canada. That's exactly the sort of thing that you want from a team leader. And so I think they're heading in the right direction. And Alex Albon is a part of that. You know, he's already obviously in sync with what's going on, and he drove beautifully in Canada, no real errors. Difficult race, one-stop strategy, made the tires last, and it was more than a one-stop strategy. I mean, he came in when the safety car brought them in, and then stayed on that set of tires the rest of the race, despite all the guys queued up behind him. And that was a really, really good drive, I thought. And so I think they're making progress, definitely. I think if you're a Williams fan, you should feel quite encouraged by the season so far.
Absolutely. Yeah. It was, great to see that performance from Alex. And then, on the other end with Red Bull is, when you look at these races, they're obviously, they're finishing some of these races, 20, 30 seconds ahead of the next team. Does it, at the end of the day, there's obviously so much, there's so much when it comes to the technical side of things that I don't even understand that's happening behind the scenes. But does it, at the end of the day, do you think it really comes down to the fact that they have someone like Adrian Newey that is really
Oh yeah, it is 100% down to that. And it's not just Adrian. You got to give a lot of credit to Christian Horner for creating an environment in which Adrian has stayed so long and is able to have his roots there, to the point where a lot of other good people can learn from Adrian, and they're going to other teams and doing a good job there. I mean, that's reflection on Adrian and how well he's done. It's a reflection on Christian and the environment he's created. You can't say that Frank or Ron did as good a job as Christian Horner in keeping Adrian in one place. Because Adrian, like all engineers, he's a bit sort of all over the place, or was anyway, probably not now. All engineers are like that, because they're always thinking of a million things different simultaneously, and that politically they're all a bit, inept. Well, that's not the right word probably, but anyway, you know what I'm saying. So so Adrian's there, and that's a huge thing. It's a massive thing. I mean, he's the best guy out there, and he's been with Red Bull for I don't know how long. And so yeah, Max is in there enjoying every millisecond he can while Adrian's still around.
Is there anything in our world of F1 today that that stands out to you that you think we should change? I've been following the sport since 2009, and there's just so much to love about it. But is there, for you've seen different generations of the sport, is there something today that you think, we've overthought that, or we'd love to go back to the way it was with this? Or is there anything that stands out to you like that?
I think on a micro level, I would say, I think getting rid of spare cars was a bad step. I think the incremental increase in cost of running a third car, a spare car, is nothing compared with some of the other costs that Formula One have wasted money on over the years. And I think it's a shame for spectators, for all concerned, if a star driver is out for some stupid reason, taken out by somebody else, for example, and is unable to restart. And a good example, British Grand Prix 2021, Max Verstappen. It would have been kind of nice if Max, I know he had to have the medical, but let's assume that he was okay. Would have been kind of nice if he'd been able to jump in the spare car at the restart and do the race, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And we used to have that all the time, start the spare car. And I think it was a backward step when we got rid of the spare car. That's on the micro level. On the macro level, I would say, I think we are dependent. We're starting to get too dependent on close racing and overtaking in order to say that our sport is in great health, because there are so many other aspects of Formula One that are intriguing and are fascinating that we don't untap and which we don't expose the public to, so that we're kind of dependent on, that was a great race. Oh, it was a boring race. What are we going to do to fix the boredom? But if we showed the true picture of Formula One, the technology, the business world, the enormity of the global platform, if we brought all that as Netflix shows in their own right, then I don't think Formula One would be so exposed to always having to have close racing and be paranoid if one driver wins every race, because there would be so much other stuff going on not the least of which would be the technology of the teams that are trying to fight back, which is a great story in itself, that it would be okay and everyone would enjoy it. And if you think about, one of the best books I ever read was Harrison Storm's Angle of Attack, which he was the president of North American during the Apollo era, obviously bidding for the contracts, but beyond that, making the parts for a lot of the Apollo program. And most of the bits in his book that stand out are when he lost the deal and they were struggling and this went wrong and that went wrong and nothing was right. And they were the golden moments of the book. And right now, it would be brilliant television if we knew what was really going on at Ferrari and Mercedes in order to try to beat Red Bull. But yet we don't know. Formula One prides itself on its DNA involving technology. And yet when it actually comes down really to touching and feeling the technology and the people controlling the technology, creating the technology, we have no idea. All we can do is read the sort of, the puffs in the press release, which tell us that they've got an upgrade. Don't be too specific. Big deal. What we want to know is the fist hammering that goes on in the boardroom, and what the wind tunnel guys are saying we should do, and what the vehicle dynamics people are saying we should do, and what the suspension people are saying we should do. That's what we want. And there's a way of creating that without giving away secrets. I know if Formula One people heard me saying this now, and say, "Oh, but it's all secret, it's all our IP." Well, I would say, trust us. We know how to do our job as well, and you can do that without giving away secrets. And I think that's the biggest mistake Formula One are making at the moment. They're not exposing the public to all those other wonderful things. And if you take sponsorship, searching, procuring as another great industry, a sponsor's out there, 4 teams are vying for that sponsor. That's a great story, following all 4 and the way the approaches they do to that sponsor, and then being in the boardroom when the sponsor makes the decision as to which team they're going to go with. That's no more private or inaccessible than all the stuff they're trying to do with the drivers, where they create it anyway. So, they might as well create the other stuff just to keep the public going. And then we got all that other, we got the travel. I don't think we make anything like enough of the global footprint that Formula One has. Yes, it's lovely to say that we transport these races all around the world, but let's get into that whole travel business and the dramas with the customs and the immigration and the visas and the effect of Brexit and all that stuff. Let's get into it all. The truck drivers and the stuff when they get a puncture on the way, let's get all that in. That's all part of the Formula One tapestry. And we're not getting any of that. And that's a shame, because what's the point of doing it all if you're not going to make a lot of it? It's not difficult to have a crew, a TV crew with each team doing all that stuff behind the scenes. It's a tiny, tiny cost relative to all the other stuff they're talking about. So that's what I would do. And then I would make Formula One much less dependent on always having to have at least 9 overtakes in order to justify a 5-star rating for a Grand Prix or something ludicrous like that.
Yeah. I love your thoughts on this. I completely agree. I feel like there are, for as special of a sport as this is, I feel like there are too many walls up right now between teams and fans, that only it's like they hold us at a distance and only let us get so close. I'm going to keep watching because I love it and I'm passionate about it. But I have friends who have gone in and out. They'll watch every now and then, but they're not diehard tuning in every time, because I think a lot of it is the access that we don't have full access, and there's a lot of what's going, why was all of a sudden Mercedes dominant for so long, and obviously we have new regulations and so forth. But I'd love to hear more about that story of all of a sudden why a team like Mercedes or Ferrari aren't battling super closely with Red Bull.
Why they're not winning is just as big a story as who is winning.
Exactly.
It comes down, I think, to the fatal mistake that TV directors generally make with sport, which is that they tend to show the fans or the team or the guys in the box of the winning side first. They love to see all the celebration, and then they may cut to something else. Wrong. They should be showing the loser. It's much better television. And to understand why Mercedes made the mistakes they did, why Ferrari made the mistakes they did, is just as interesting, if not more, than how Adrian got it right, in my view.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You know, especially when you have someone like Lewis in the car, and you can hear his frustrations over the radio, you know, like what are we doing here? What's happening? You know, I'd love to get more.
Absolutely. Well, it's not only Lewis. I think it's everybody at Mercedes, you know,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
it's that frustration, and there's a lot more frustration in Formula One than there is adulation and or jubilation, and that frustration is not adequately covered, I don't think, because it's great television, great viewing anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. We need to get you, you know, helping steer that ship and getting some more of that back in. um, is there, you know, we've got so many wonderful circuits, you know, that, like you were saying, the travel is one of the most, it's amazing how I can't wrap my mind around how they do it, how they pack this stuff up and they travel from one country to the next. So it's just unbelievable how they make it work. Is there a, you know, I'm sure you've been to, you know, just about all the great tracks. Is there one that stands out to you that is just really special? That if you could go to one more race, you know, in your lifetime, where would you want to go?
I think probably Suzuka, Japan. I love that circuit, and Japan is so different from the cultures in which we tend to race that it's always refreshing to go there. And I love the economy of scale in Japan and the organization. And I love the patience of the fans in the terrible weather usually. And I love turn 1A, 1B, the S's. I love the Degnas. I love Spoon. I love 130R. I love the last chicane. It's just a great racetrack above all. And I kind of like the paddock area there. It's a little bit folksy compared with a lot. And I like trains as well. I love train travel. So inevitably in Japan, you tend to do a lot of train travel. So yeah, it would be Japan, I think.
That's great. Yeah, seems like an exhilarating track, a fast course. Man, one day I hope to step foot in a paddock. It doesn't seem as easily accessible these days. I love your story about.
I think I've lost my mic here. Could you hear me all right then?
Yeah, I can hear you great.
Wow. Okay, that's amazing. I'm just gonna go on again.
Yeah, I was just saying that, you know, one day I hope to get to experience the sights and the smells of a paddock. I'll never forget walking into on the Thursday when I was in Austin, walking in and it would my very first experience going to a track for a race weekend and walking in, not knowing even if I'd get in that day. I just walked through the gates, and I'll never forget walking into the stands and looking straight over and seeing, I think it was an AlphaTauri car that was the first one that caught my eye. And I'll never forget, even though I wasn't in the paddock, I was close enough. It was at the start finish straight, just looking over and just took my breath away. So I love your story about, you know, getting that close and seeing seeing the likes of Jim Clark, you know, when you at an early age and having that access. That's incredible. It truly is.
Yeah, I mean, today I think I had more access then than, or as a journalist even today has, because I could even when I was working in Formula One as a journalist, most of the time up till I don't know, mid 2000s, you could basically walk into the garage and chat, and I knew all the mechanics, I knew all the engineers, I knew all the drivers, and I knew when to talk to them, when not to. Important point. And then there was the motorhomes where everybody gravitated for lunch or drinks or whatever it was. And then there was the party that was organized by Elf or Marlboro or any of the big sponsors. Everybody was there. It was much easier to get to know people and to understand them. And I kind of feel guilty today because I know very few people in the teams in any position. And but then again, I don't think anybody does. So I shouldn't really feel that guilty, because the teams pride themselves now on making sure that nobody knows who any of their people are,
Sure.
because they don't want anyone to see their organogram, give away their secrets. It's pathetic, really. But yeah, again, I think I was probably pretty lucky to be in that era.
Even aside from F1, just in life, what makes what makes Peter Windsor come alive? What fills you up?
Gratitude for everything that I have. Try to remember that there's a much greater power than anything we can imagine here on Earth, and to have a relationship with constant attention, really, I think is what one I try to have, and to do the right thing, to be humble, to be helpful, and to respect the rights of others. Very, very difficult. I'm probably the worst example in humanity of any of those. But if you strive and you've got a goal and a straight line ahead of you, that you can hopefully, over a long period of time, learning from your own mistakes and with a bit of help and guidance, you can achieve that. I think trying to learn to respect the rights of others constantly at any given moment, actually, if you think about it, sums up the solution to the entire problems of the world, because everybody respected everybody's rights all the time, everywhere, no more issues. But I was raised to think that pride is a cancer of the soul, and so I think that is a great temptation as human beings. We tend to talk about being very proud of this or proud of that, and sometimes we don't mean it in an egotistical way. But dignity is a great thing. Happiness is a wonderful thing if it's for the right reason. But I think there's too much emphasis on pride, on being proud of something that we've achieved, without acknowledging that in reality we're just tiny, tiny specks in the cosmos, and we don't know what's good for us or bad for us. All we can do is rely on our spiritual strength.
That's beautiful. Well, Peter, I will say that I think you seem like a wonderful person, and you do, from the little that I know of you, yeah, you're a wonderful human being, and I'm just so grateful and so honored that you would take some time out of your day to chat with me. So thank you so much, and I'll continue tuning into your content. I love your stuff, and yeah, I appreciate it so much. Have great respect for you, Peter. Thank you so much.